The Illinois Republican congressional delegation expresses doubt about the accuracy of the state's voter rolls. It comes as President Trump pushes to nationalize elections in Democratic-led states. Tonight, we get to the point.
From Chicago's very own, with WGN political editor Taman Bradley, this is The Point.
Good evening. Illinois has until tomorrow to respond to a letter sent by Republican Representatives Darren LaHood, Mike Bost, and Mary Miller asking for information about how voter records are vetted. The lawmakers say they want to make sure people who are dead or undocumented are not voting. Governor Pritzker's office has responded by saying the state is administering elections seriously. Earlier today, we spoke with Congressman LaHood. Today, the House advanced a bill that would require proof of citizenship for voter registration and ID to cast a ballot. Voter ID laws have been proven to disproportionately impact Black voters, Native American communities, students, and the elderly. If this becomes law, what support would you provide to ensure these groups have equal access to the ballot box?
Well, people right now don't have a lot of faith in our election system. We've seen that in multiple elections. And so what we've talked about is how do we bring more transparency, more accountability to the election system. And so, you know, I've seen a lot of polling on requiring an ID to vote. It's almost an 80% issue across the board, urban areas, suburban areas, rural areas. As you may know, you need an ID to buy a six-pack of beer. You need an ID to get on an airplane. You need an ID to rent a car. We believe it's important that you have an ID to vote so that, it eliminates fraud and people taking advantage of the system. And so this legislation, I think, is common sense legislation. I support it. I've already voted in the House to support it, and I look forward to voting for it again.
As I bet you know, the Heritage Foundation put out a study that found just 19 cases of ineligible voting since 2016. So what sort of questions, what are you looking at here?
Well, again, making sure that the person that is voting has an ID, is the person that should be voting, is important, again, for transparency, for accountability. And as I talk to my constituents across the 16th Congressional District, when you ask them, should you have an ID to vote, overwhelmingly people say yes. I mean, we require an ID for many things in our society, and we should. But what's more important to our democratic system than having a system that makes sure that people that are registered to vote are the same ones that vote? And so we believe having an ID is the right approach to take. And we've had bipartisan support on this.
The Illinois State Board of Elections has until tomorrow to respond to a letter you sent them along with Reps Mary Miller and Mike Bost. What information are you asking for?
Well, what we have found is Illinois, unfortunately, we've hemorrhaged a lot of voters out of Illinois that now spend, for instance, 6 months in a day in Florida, and they become Florida residents, even though they still live in Illinois for almost half of the year, but they're now citizens of Florida, maybe Tennessee, maybe Indiana. But when they register to vote in Florida, those voting rolls in the county they lived in Illinois have not been scrubbed. And so there was an independent study that was done that showed that counties in Illinois need to go through their voter rolls to make sure that those former voters in those counties that have moved to another state no longer can vote. So our letter is kind of a common sense approach, asking the counties to purge those people that can no longer vote in Illinois. And by the way, this is going on around the country, asking for states to clean up their voting rolls to make sure that the people that are registered in Illinois are the ones that are voting.
Governor Pritzker's office has said they were confident the state was already in compliance with the law. Are you suggesting that past elections in Illinois have been rigged?
No, that's not what our letter says. We are going by the independent Inspector General report that showed that many counties in Illinois have not appropriately scrubbed their voting rolls to make sure that people that have moved to other states aren't still on those voting rolls. That's what we're asking to do. We believe, that's a good accountability measure. It's the responsible thing to do. Other states have done that. We think Illinois should, for the confidence of voters, make sure that this gets done.
Last week, President Trump suggested he wants to nationalize elections in states led by Democrats. But of course, the Constitution leaves that role to the states. Do you agree with the president's idea?
I don't believe we should nationalize elections. You know, I believe in states' rights. That's in the Constitution. That doesn't mean I like what the state of California does, or maybe the state of Illinois or the state of New York, but we have elected officials in those states. And there's an expression that states are the laboratories of democracy. And the federal government shouldn't be dictating every single policy, leave that up to the states. Now, I will tell you, as I mentioned before, I think requiring an ID to vote is essential and ought to be a national issue, but that does not conflict with how states should govern their elections. For instance, Illinois, you can vote 45 days in advance. Other states are less than that. Other states don't allow early voting. We ought to leave it to the discretion of states to decide that, not nationalize it from a federal perspective.
Our thanks to GOP Congressman Darren LaHood. Up next, an update on the Bears Stadium saga. We're back in 1 minute. Today, 2 new players entered the Bears Stadium sweepstakes. Portage, Indiana, and the state of Iowa are both trying to attract the franchise. Tonight, Arlington Heights, where the Bears already own land, is having a rally in support of the team moving there. This seems to all be unfolding quickly, so we thought it would make sense to talk with a senior lawmaker working to keep the Bears in Illinois. State Representative Cam Buckner, welcome to The Point.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining. Today, Portage, Indiana unveiled a plan for a privately financed lakefront stadium that they say they can break ground on as early as June. So, Representative, does Illinois have the best offer on the table?
I truly believe that we do have the best offer, and that as the Bears go through these different options that people are coming up with, that they will see that we will, at the end of the day, still have the best offer. Listen, part of their iconic brand is tied to the state. Part of their valuation economically is tied to the ability to be in this state. We know that when all the dust settles, that we will be able to put together the best package, not just to keep the Bears here in the state of Illinois, but the best package for the taxpayers that can be done in a way that is prudent and smart and balanced.
It's my understanding that leaders have been working on the infrastructure package for Arlington Heights, as well as payment in lieu of property taxes. If that's the case, what's the holdup?
Well, listen, I think these type of deals, they're huge, and they take some time. And I've always said that they require both sunlight and scrutiny. The days of doing these things behind closed doors in a smoke-filled room and emerging with $1 billion or $1 billion plus deal that the taxpayers have to pay for, it's no longer the way we operate. So what we've done is we've been very intentional about having the conversations, about hammering out the details. We have made considerable progress in the last few weeks to figure out how we move forward, and once again, to create a situation that works for this organization, but for me, most importantly, that works for the people of Illinois.
Is Chicago still an option, or have the Bears moved on?
I think the Bears have to answer that question. I can't answer that for them. I've been very clear that I think that Chicago is a very special place. I represent Chicago. I live in Chicago. I think that there are some opportunities here that have not been explored when it comes to stadium redevelopment. And so I think those conversations will continue to be had. The Bears have to make a final decision, though, on what works for them.
If the Bears do leave Soldier Field, as it appears that they're going to do, what can they do for Chicago? What should they do? Can they move Hallis Hall to Chicago, for example?
Well, that's an idea that I've touted for a while. I think there are other things from a financial mechanism standpoint that people who represent Chicago, like myself, want to see. These are all part of the nuance of the conversation. I think 20 years ago when the Soldier Field renovation happened, the people of Chicago got a pretty bad deal on that, and there was no surety and no way to hold the Bears here, in which now we're having that conversation 20 years later. I think whatever we do moving forward has to acknowledge the past, but also gives us a path to the future.
It really seems like places outside of Illinois are just throwing money at the Bears from a business standpoint. If somebody's going to offer to pay for the stadium and you don't have to pay the property taxes, you can't. How do you beat an offer like that?
Because we beat it because what we have here is already better than what anybody else is offering. I love the Quad Cities, and I love portions of the state that have come forward. There are some admirable things in Northwest Indiana, but the truth of the matter is that None of this stuff compares to what we have here in the state of Illinois. They would have to be rebuilding an entire ecosystem, an entire civic infrastructure piece that does not exist there currently. And so once again, most of the Bears' valuation is tied to this city and this state, and we don't have to start from scratch. We're ready to go here. We have what they need to be successful, and we'll prove that throughout these conversations.
Governor Pritzker's State of the State is next week. Do you expect an announcement before he speaks?
I don't know. I think that the governor has been really focused on making sure that this budget is going to be one that's balanced, one that is smart and prudent and takes into account the chaos that's happening in Washington, D.C. I think that's the number one priority. I think we're also going to be talking about how we develop and how we grow economically. And so there may be a Bears piece in that conversation because people are going to ask, obviously, but I'm not sure that there will be an actual announcement.
And just really quickly, I have about 15 seconds left. Are you talking to them every day? Is that how this is working out?
We're talking very frequently, not necessarily every day, but at a very rapid clip. As I said, there have been more conversations recently than we've had in a long time.
Okay. All right. State Representative Cam Buckner, we appreciate it.
Thank you.
Tonight, a tip of the hat to the Chicago Fire Football Club. The team just announced they'll break ground on their new stadium in Chicago's South Loop in just 3 weeks. The $750 million project was announced last summer. They moved quickly. Owner Joe Mansueto is footing the bill. And that is The Point. I'm Taman Bradley. Micah and Ray are back tonight at 9. But first, the forecast.